Hello, my friends. I want to share with you some unusual research methods that are appropriate and effective for astrological research, and they're not often used in most other fields, like fields like psychology, medicine, other fields. But these research methods do work very well in astrology. It's good news for the field of astrology because these research methods do not require a lot of statistics and things that a lot of practitioners are not comfortable with. So it's really exciting that we have these additional research methods. And the reason why we have these additional research methods in astrology that are not often used in other fields is because there's one particular way in which astrology is different from other fields that makes these methods appropriate. So, what is it that's different about astrology? Something fundamentally different about astrology compared to medicine and psychology. I'm going to tell you what it is. If you want for fun, you can think for yourself, gee, what is this way in which astrology is different from these other fields? Warning, it may not be what you're going to guess, okay? Let me tell you what it is. It's that astrology does not have a large body of research literature that clearly establishes astrological rules that work. Now, just to make this clear, I am not saying anything about whether there are astrological variables that are associated with measurable effects. In other words, is there something in astrology like a sun sign or an aspect or whatever that correlates with some personality trait that can be measured or some behavior? I'm not talking about whether that's true or not. What I'm saying is we don't have a lot of solid research supporting that. At the best, we might have a few variables, a few astrological things that are supported by previous research, but they're, that's even debatable. There isn't much, as opposed to, of course, medicine or psychology, which have been established for decades and, longer than decades. And there have been journals for a long time and all kinds of specific studies that find some things that are going on. The fact that there's a large body of literature of things that are found in these other fields, and we do not have that in astrology, means that astrology is at a very early stage of using modern research methods and confirming things using these modern research methods. So this makes a big difference in terms of what research methods you can use. Now there's a paper that was written in 2009. I've got the reference there at the bottom. The paper is called 4 Stages of a Scientific Discipline, 4 Types of Scientists. Here's a quote from the paper. I propose the classification of the evolutionary stages that a scientific discipline evolves through and the type of scientists, this is really important, the type of scientists that are most productive at each stage. So he's proposing there are 4 stages in the evolution of a science, from the time that the science begins to develop to where it becomes more fully developed. And that each scientific discipline evolves sequentially through the 4 stages. So this is like 4 general stages, applies to almost any area of science. So, again, the critical thing here, I've highlighted it in green at the top, that depending on what stage you're in, certain types of scientists are more productive. And let me give you a preview of what we're going to conclude about this at the bottom in green highlight. That in these 4 stages, astrology is at an early stage. I would say it's transitioning from phase 1 to phase 2. I'll explain to you on the next slide what these phases are, but I want to give you, kind of the conclusion of where this is headed to. Astrology is in an early phase. That's kind of intuitively obvious by the fact that we don't have academic journals. We don't have a lot of solid research done. A lot of people wonder if it's even possible. Even astrologers have doubts. So a kind of scientific phase of astrology hasn't really kicked in, especially even practitioners don't see, a lot of practitioners don't see that as even being important. So if astrology is heading into a scientific phase, it's at the very, very beginning. I think it's at the beginning of phase 2 of these 4 stages. Psychology and medicine are in phase 3. And this really has a huge impact on what kind of research you do, what's appropriate, and what succeeds. This author of this paper, Alexander Schneider, he's really emphasizing certain kinds of research work in phase 1 and 2, and different kinds of research work in phase 3. By work, we mean get positive results, make discoveries. Well, these are the 4 stages. In the first paragraph, he talks about stage 1. This is a quote from his paper. I've broken it up into different sections and highlighted things to make it clear, what these stages are. In stage 1, it's the beginning of a new discipline. There's new objects, new phenomena. Like, whoa, look at this. Imagine the beginning of modern chemistry when they did experiments and they said, oh, matter is made up of little tiny things. This was an idea that goes back to ancient Greece, but there was no solid evidence. There was no way to build upon that idea in terms of research and discovery. So you have this new information, maybe new tools, maybe they're microscopes, maybe they're just ways of looking at things that nobody ever did before. New objects and phenomena, and a new language develops. And then as you become aware of this phenomena that haven't been studied in the same way, you enter stage 2, where the emphasis is on a toolbox of methods and techniques. So stage 1 is like, oh my God, matter is made up of little things. Number 2, how do we investigate this further, improve the tools, the techniques of this new discipline? The spectrum of objects and phenomena that fall into the realm of the new science are further understood at this stage. So you're starting to get a comprehension. Then you know what these dynamics are, what this field is. Then third stage is the flowering of this. It's where that science blossoms. In the third stage, the highest number of original research publications is generated. This is where rigorous research is done, clear conclusions are made, and knowledge expands tremendously. The majority of third stage investigation is based on the initial application of new research methods. So when there's a new field, you often need new research methods. This is kind of a radical idea that each science goes through these 4 stages and has its own unique tools, understanding, its own research methods that have to be developed. Of course, it builds on existing research from other fields, but you find out that certain methods work better. That's why we have, biostatistics and people that specialize in very specific kinds of research with specific tools and specific research methods. And the 4th stage is to maintain and pass on scientific knowledge. So at a certain point, the science kind of maxes out, starts growing more slowly, and it's more about the application, the engineering, the application, building things, making things that use what was understood. So you get, whether it's televisions, radios, rocket ships, the internet, etc., understanding continues to increase, but more emphasis on the application of what was discovered and how to present that information and better understand it. So new ways to present scientific information are generated, and crucial revisions are often made of the role of the discipline within the constantly evolving scientific environment. Okay, those are the 4 stages. I'm suggesting that areas like psychology and medicine are in stage 3. They're doing their research, and I think it's realistic. I have a feeling some of you watching this having the same thought. These 4 stages, I don't think are like cut and dry and distinct. They flow into each other, and you get odd things, like you might get some stage 1 activity even in stage 4, but in general, it seems to make common sense. I'm not an expert in the history of science to the extent of the author of this paper, but it seems reasonable. And astrology, I think, is entering stage 2, at least the vibrational astrology that I'm involved in, because we have spent a lot of time in stage 1, and now we're moving into stage 2. I'll explain more of that in the next slide. Main point is certain research methods are going to work in stage 1 and stage 2 and be very useful that are not as useful in stage 3, and vice versa. There are research methods that tend to work well in stage 3, not as useful in stage 1 and 2, and different research methods in different disciplines as well. Okay, here's another quote, a long quote from this same paper. And I've got in bold the key thing I want to emphasize. The very nature of each stage determines the optimal psychological type and modus operandi of the scientist operating within it. In other words, certain scientists are more appropriate for certain stages. So here's the part in bold. Thus, it is not only the talent and devotion of scientists that determines whether they are capable of contributing substantially, but rather whether they have the right type of talent for the chosen scientific discipline at the time. So, certain temperament inclined to certain kinds of research, to certain kinds of investigations, is going to work in that field at a certain stage. You might have a person who would be perfect at stage 3, but the discipline's only in stage 2, or vice versa. And he goes on to elaborate on how important this is. Understanding the 4 different evolutionary stages of a scientific discipline might be instrumental for many scientists in optimizing their career path. Right? If you want to be in tune with what the flow is, what's happening, what's needed, it's useful in assembling scientific teams, precluding conflicts and maximizing productivity. The proposed model of scientific evolution might also be instrumental for society in organizing and managing the scientific process. Right? I mean, what phase are we in? What's needed? What do we need to emphasize? No public policy aimed at stimulating the scientific process can be equally beneficial for all 4 stages. So people could be pouring a lot of energy, time, money into certain endeavors. It's not appropriate for the stage. You've got the idea. You can pause this and read the rest of it. It just elaborates on what I've just said. Now, I said before, phase 1, developing a language for astrology. Phase 1, developing a language of astrology that will be used in research. What is this language? Well, in the vibrational astrology that I am involved in, we have a language like this. Aspects are vibrational in nature. Other planetary configurations like midpoint structures, isotraps, are also vibrational phenomena. So we have the concepts, aspects, angular distance between planets, and how they work, how they're understood, how we can understand additional aspects. We understand them as vibrations and all of the details of that, the modulus functions we use to get hints at the meaning of additional vibrations, the way we factor numbers and put emphasis on prime numbers. We have a language, we have concepts, we have ways of discovering, we have ways of looking at the data and understanding it. We understand, this is a typo here. Third item is not aspects, but zodiac signs or structures in space, all explained in terms of fundamental theories of spin and dimension reduction and so on. You know, I've made 800 tutorial videos, and they're all free. You can watch those that explain all of this language, all these concepts, new language, new concepts. And that's what he says. Each science will develop a new language. It won't just adapt, just kind of transfer ideas from another. I was thinking of the word graft, like with a plant. You graft this branch onto another thing. It's got to, of course, there is some of that, but there's a lot of new, fresh work that's being done. It's exactly what's happening in vibrational astrology. Also, ideas like astrological variables are essential functions that have a purpose. It's not fundamentally an archetypal language. This is the language. This is what he's talking about, the concepts, the structures, the way of understanding, and that has made progress through some research, through some analysis. Now we've got some of that basic language done. As we enter phase 2, do we need to keep improving that language? Not so much. Of course it would help, but it's not the critical thing. As we move into phase 2, what do we need? We need the toolbox of methods and techniques. That's where we are with astrology. We need the software, the databases. They're building, they're available to some extent. But this is the critical path right now. The software to make the calculations, the databases, selecting what research methods work, implementing those research methods, seeing how they work in reality. And then the extension of those ideas, the ideas of overtone vibrations, octaves, fractal patterns and flavors, and the energy process of the planets, that language, implementing that language and understanding the details of it, measuring it and implementing it in the research analysis, in the analysis of charts, fully engaging that language to all the details and implementing it in our work, whether it's with clients or in research, and having the toolbox to do all that. We need to take those ideas and work them out in detail. The software development, huge amount of work. We've really barely scratched the surface of what's needed, even though we have some very good software. The choice of statistical methods. I recently used logistic regression to better understand anorexia and bulimia, the eating disorders. It worked beautifully, better than I had even hoped. So by implementing the toolbox, pulling on these things, would principal component analysis, how well would that work? I'm very curious about that. I've used some machine learning techniques in the past. I've used, which are called support vector machines and random forests and artificial neural networks. And sometimes the results were disappointing. I got some promising results from random forests and simple decision trees. The tools, it's like getting your screwdriver, your saw, your hammer out and seeing, I can hammer this really nicely. You've got to actually do it, engage. That's phase 2. This is where we are with astrology. This is the big thing. The development of guidelines for applying astrology in counseling, developing methods for mundane forecasts. We're in this perfecting the toolbox stage. We're just entering this. Now, if you're not in vibrational astrology, you may not know about the language that's been developed over at least 10 years. The idea of zodiac signs and structures in space. The tutorial videos on that are over 10 years old. So it might be, or I know it's new to the vast majority of astrologers, but for those of us working in this field, we've been developing this for some time, this language, this way of understanding, and the emphasis now is on the toolbox. Now, in these early stages, here's the critical thing. In these early stages, like phase 2 of a science, which I think is where astrology is right now, this is from a different article. This is an article called Scientific Modeling, written in 2011, updated in 2018. And it states that scientists start with a small amount of data and build up a better and better representation of the phenomena they're explaining and using for prediction as time goes on. This is one of the differences. In the early stage of research, we often use small amounts of data. The large amounts of data is more common in the third stage. And again, I don't think these stages are like rigid, separate rooms. I think it's a general tendency. So I think that large, and I think this is quite reasonable. I don't think just I think most people involved in astrological research will agree with this. There's brilliant research using large sample sizes in astrology. It's not so much that we need to stop doing anything we're doing. It's that there are additional things that we're not doing. These additional research methods that work in phase 2 of when you're just building your ideas. We do not have a large body of established literature. These additional research methods, often that do not require large sample sizes, they're an additional thing that we can use. Now, here's a quote from an article. Listen to this title of this paper: Breaking Free of Sample Size Dogma. There's a dogma, there's a well-established principle that you need large sample sizes to have enough power to get your results. We all know this. And what the authors of this paper are saying is, you know this, but it's not as true as you think it is. In order to do innovative research, you don't always need large sample sizes. Of course, you usually do. Large sample sizes are wonderful, but it's not as essential all the time as we often think. This is a paper written in, what year was 2011? And let me read this. Innovative. I'm just going to skip some of the words in here to emphasize the key points. Innovative research is often delayed or prevented by reviewers' expectations that any study performed on humans must be shown in advance to have high statistical power. So someone submits an article to an academic journal and they don't see that large sample size because it doesn't give enough what we call statistical power. And they say, oh, this is, you submit a paper that's of like 6 people or 10 people you've studied. The editors of the journal, the reviewers are going to look at that and go, this is a joke. You're not going to discover anything with 6 people. This is crazy. They just toss that right out. Most of the time that's true, but big surprise. Got to break free from this dogma. Sometimes you can make a discovery with just a few cases. There's some tricks to this. People are not rigorous in the research methods. They say, oh, good, I saw 3 clients and I found something. No. You still have to be rigorous. There are rules to how to do this. But if done properly, you can sometimes make discoveries with very few cases. And we call this N, the letter N, the number of cases that you're studying. So to read this quote a little further, this supposed requirement is contradicted by the reality that increasing sample sizes produce diminishing marginal returns. So as you add more and more people, which is a lot of work and a lot of time, it gives you less and less benefit very often. Now, studies of new ideas often must start small, sometimes even with an N of 1. One case. We make fun of this in statistics where, somebody will observe something. We joke around and say, well, an N of 1 isn't very convincing. It's like ridiculous. Like you just only looked at one case. But in certain situations, you can make one observation that can make a huge difference. The point is, especially in astrology, which is in this very early phase, and almost no other disciplines are at an early phase like this, sometimes a specific observation can make a huge difference. And it can even happen for sciences or fields that are in stage 3. So to read this last part in bold, small sample sizes for such research can produce more projected scientific value per dollar spent than large sample sizes. Renouncing false dogma about sample size would remove a serious barrier to innovation and translation. Wow. He's saying this widespread belief by research methodologists like myself, people who have expertise in research methods and have studied it academically, this widespread belief that you always have to have a good sample size, for any serious research, it's a false dogma, not always true, and it's a serious serious barrier to innovation. Wow. So from the same paper, early studies of new ideas have undergone little or no previous research. These studies may lack any preliminary data, for practical reasons are usually small. This is the state of astrology. We have very little data. These studies may lack any preliminary data. That's what happens when you're in stage 2. That's the typical situation. You're starting fresh. You don't have a lot of literature. You don't have a lot of stuff to build on. And for practical reasons, you often start small. Some people say, well, if we had tons of money, we could hire data collectors. We would have tens of thousands. We'll find out things. That's true, but it's also true that it's not necessary. Sometimes you can start small and build from there. It's very, very common. Now here's another paper, different paper, and this is more recent, 2021, called The Importance of Small Samples in Medical Research. So several people in these academic journals publishing papers about, hey, small sample sizes sometimes work. And this is specific to people in medical research, but it applies for astrology as well. He says many medical breakthroughs have occurred with a few or even a single observation. N equals 1. We're back to the N equals 1. And he gives 3 examples. Edward Jenner injected a boy with smallpox in 1796 that led to a vaccine. The development of penicillin from a single observation by Alexander Fleming, who noticed in 1928 that a mold had developed on a contaminated staphylococcus culture, etc. Single observation, like he's looking at this mold, he sees something happening, oh my God, that observation can lead to a breakthrough. It happens. A heart transplant by Christian Barnard in 1967 opened enormous possibilities. Only one instance of death soon after consuming a specific substance is generally considered enough to suspect that this substance can be poisonous. Single cases under certain conditions can be informative. And small sample sizes, if studied properly, can lead to information. But the point is, properly. This is not a license for people to just say, my last 4 clients had Moon and Virgo and they were all what. That's still, no, that's not giving us any great confidence. There's certain requirements, and I'll talk more about that later. So concluding comments. Here's the conclusions. Where are we with the large groups of, large N, large sample sizes? Do we want to use those for astrology, which has very little literature? I think it's reasonable to conclude, yes, we do. Research studies of a large group of people with a control group are still they're important in astrological research. There are several important studies in astrology that use this standard research procedure where you collect a large N, large meaning hundreds or thousands of cases, you have a control group. And I've done this research myself, the study on bipolar disorder that I did with Giselle Terry, is an example of that. And that's the best research I've been involved in so far. So this 4 discrete periods is very useful and important, but I think it's reasonable to see that those overlap. They're not like sequential, clear divisions. They're overall tendencies. The general principle of 4 stages of evolution of a science is helpful in improving astrological research. And for astrology, it's telling us you can use small n if you do it in certain ways. Now, I made a video recently called Make Discoveries in Astrology with Mathematical Modeling, and that uses the small n. What's kind of exciting and important for me is that I made that video before researching what I'm presenting in this video, researching other people that are also emphasizing things like mathematical modeling, small models, especially when you have very little previous solid research. In that video, Make Discoveries in Astrology with Mathematical Modeling, which I highly recommend if you have not seen it and you find this topic interesting, it gives examples of doing research with small n and how it can really work extremely well. So I state in that video, breakthrough discoveries are being made in astrology by fitting mathematical formulas to observations. So you can do this kind of mathematical modeling where every case you see, you try to fit into your model. That's all discussed in the previous, in that video. But to summarize very simply, it's simply this. Suppose you say, Gemini is curious and talks a lot. And you get a client and they have Sun and Moon in Gemini and they're talking, blah, 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 and then you get another client, they're talking. Well, sooner or later, and usually sooner to be honest about it, you'll get a client who doesn't talk a lot, doesn't exhibit those qualities. And what astrologers often do is they kind of rationalize it. They say, oh, well, there's planets in the 12th house, the dispositor. If is in the 12th house, and they have all these, I call them excuses, they call them reasons, why this person doesn't fit. If you simply write that down and make it a rule that, okay, here's my modified set of rules for talking a lot. Certain planets in Gemini, how many planets, how do you want to work this out, and what will make it not work. And then every time you see a case, you try to understand it. You don't just do a statistical thing and say, oh, well, I got statistical significance. You try to understand every single one that you encounter and create a simple, elegant model for it. This can be very effective. People that are accustomed to stage 3 research will say, well, you haven't, you don't have a sample size that's going to give us confidence. Da, da, da. Right, that's true, but you wouldn't find the rules that will work well if you don't do this kind of mathematical modeling. Very often it's essential at the stage to improve your theory, that you study each case and get every case to work, or nearly every case to fit into your model. Anyway, you can watch another video and see some more information about it. So the papers that I've cited in this presentation, which I just learned about recently after I made the previous video, they strengthen my belief that there are vitally important quantitative research methods in astrology that do not require large sample sizes. And the mathematical modeling that I mentioned in the other paper, I'll give a link to that in the other video, sorry. Let me say that slower. The other video, Make Discoveries in Astrology with Mathematical Modeling, I'll have a link to that in the description below. And you can watch that as an example, concrete examples of what I'm talking about when I say you can make discoveries without a large sample size. What's exciting here, and what I've just learned and I'm sharing with you, is that this idea that I had, that you can make these discoveries without large sample sizes using things like the mathematical modeling of every single case you encounter, is something other people have talked about and they've published in academic journals. So this is getting to be more recognized as important for research methodologists to understand that not everything fits into the rules of what makes for large effect sizes and statistical significance. There's also rules for developing theory from clearly consistent observations or striking observations, like somebody seeing something growing on a mold and then carefully building upon that observation, rigorously following through. And the last sentence is critically important. Rigorously adhering to the requirements of a research method is essential. So this is, what I'm saying here is not a license to be lax in your research methods and think that, oh, well, I can just have small n and I'm fine. No, there's a lot of details in that other video talks about them. Otherwise, you're just fooling yourself and you're just falling back into anecdotal evidence. That's it, my friends. Thank you very much for watching this. You can email me. There's my email address. There's my website. If you're not a subscriber, and if you subscribe, that tremendously helps get more views and more attention and more support. And there's also a membership for those of you who want to dive in deep and meet in a live online meeting twice a month. Again, thank you very much, my friends. God bless. Namaste.